Tonight, I want to tell you the story of my friend Juan. Juan was a normal kid. He grew up living with his mother, his grandmother, his 4 brothers and sisters. He loved soccer. What was different between Juan and I is he grew up in Saltillo, Nicaragua. The very first time I went to Saltillo, Nicaragua, I took this picture. It was before I ever met Juan, but you can see here the difference of growing up in Saltillo versus growing up in Southwest Virginia. Now, I first met Juan about 4 years before I started Feed by Seed, the international agricultural education and development nonprofit, on a church mission trip. But from the very beginning, Juan stuck out to me. He was always so energetic, so passionate, bright, and an all-around good kid. Now, that's why it concerned me when the next time I went to Nicaragua with a Feed by Seed trip, that he told me that he was thinking about dropping out of school. I questioned him. I said, why? Your education is so valuable. Why would you think about this? And he said, it's complicated. I was obviously concerned. That's why the next time that I went to Nicaragua, I went to his house to check on him, to see how he was doing. And I was sadly met by his neighbors who told me that he had dropped out of school and he had got involved in some pretty bad things. I tried to stay in contact with him as much as possible, but it became increasingly difficult. And then, about 1.5 years ago, while I was on the farm in Nicaragua, he heard I was in town and came to tell me that he was ready to quit the industry. He said that that was the only path he had seen that he could be able to provide for his family and provide for himself. He said, but he'd been watching some of his community members, his friends, and they had told him about how agriculture was changing their lives, how they were being able to feed themselves, their families, and have enough income to better their own lives. He said that he had always wanted to be a carpenter, and that if he got involved with farming, he was hoping that he could take care of his aging grandmother, his mother, and his brothers and sisters while saving up enough money to buy the tools he needed to become a carpenter. And then until that point, he had seen the industry as the only way to do that. At that point, I interrupted him. I said, what is the industry? He quickly looked to the ground, laughed nervously, and changed the subject. I let it slide. Later that afternoon, though, I had the opportunity to talk to another community member and ask them, what is the industry? And they began to tell me about how it was anything related to organized crime, anything from petty theft to drug trafficking to even kidnapping and sex trafficking. That devastated me. I now understood why it was more complicated than that he wanted to drop out of school, because he wanted to be able to provide for his family. I did have hope, though, because he said he was ready to give that up to take up agriculture and to take up farming, to be able to provide for his family that way. So what this does, this story, it illuminates 2 ways agricultural development works. First, it provides hope for people. Secondly, it alleviates poverty and hunger. So as for the poverty and hunger piece, the World Bank says that agricultural development is at least twice as effective at alleviating poverty than development in any other sector. This paired with the United Nations Food and Agricultural Report that says that there's an 805 million people currently living in extreme poverty and malnourishment, on top of the same agency's report that says the world population is going to go from 7.2 billion people today to approximately 9.5 billion people by 2050, should be alarming. So basically, if we want to continue to have the same quality of life as a globe in 36 years as we do now, we only have 2 options. One is to completely stop population growth. Not very likely. The second is to substantially increase agricultural production. This would take nearly a doubling of food production in the next 36 years. This can only be accomplished through continuing to develop advanced agricultural systems while also teaching some of the poorest people on the planet how to feed themselves. The other part of agricultural development and what it does is the hope piece. It's more complicated, it's harder to measure, but in no way should it be considered less impactful. Through my experiences with Feed by Seed and other experiences in the developing world, I've identified 3 ways that agricultural development helps communities beyond poverty alleviation and beyond malnourishment. These 3 ways are restoration, it's used for a tool for intervention, and it's used for prevention. With restoration, communities have a restorative power. A great example of this is the country of South Korea after the Korean War. While the U.S. was afraid that the North was going to come back and try to invade, they infused millions and millions of dollars into the economy, much of which was through agricultural development. Many experts say that this strong agricultural-based economy was a key step in South Korea's ability to become the world's 15th largest economy by GDP in just over 60 years. I have seen personally examples of how agricultural development is restorative in places like Nicaragua and Uganda. Both are not too far from civil conflict and civil wars. Many of the farmers that I talk to speak about how the therapeutic nature of agriculture, from planting a seed to watching it grow to harvest, and the benefits that come from that and how they affect them as an individual, their family, and their communities in a positive way, and how that gives them hope for that day, the next growing season, the next year, and for the future in general. Then there's intervention. Intervention is a wonderful example of this is the story of Juan. It's not just the technical knowledge that agricultural development imparts, but it's beyond that. It's hope. Another wonderful story is I was in an agricultural development classroom in Nicaragua, and this young man came up to me, and he had blisters on his hands from working. I was able to give him a pair of work gloves to continue, and he told me at the end of the day that meant so much to him, that having just a pair of gloves that allowed him to keep working proved that I believed in him, and that he had never had anyone tell him that he could do something that would be meaningful in a global context or to the future. Here's his picture. He asked me to take that picture so that I would remember him and so I could come back and see the amazing work that he did. And then the last, but my favorite piece, is prevention. This is becoming increasingly important in a post-9/11 world. Some research is suggesting that at least in certain geographic areas, militant and extremist organizations are recruiting people not because they share ideological, political, or religious beliefs, but because these organizations are able to provide economically distraught communities 2 things. First, income, food, water, and shelter, basic needs. And the second is that they're able to provide them a sense of being a part of something larger than themselves. This same research is suggesting that agricultural development may be able to provide the exact same thing and help curb terrorism recruitment, at least in certain geographic areas, because it does the same things. But it never been so clear to me, Benjamin Franklin's famous quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure," until about a year ago when I was in Nicaragua and 2 young ladies came up to me in an agricultural education classroom and told me that through their agriculture education class, they learned basic life skills such as nutrition, basic economics, and leadership. And that through all of that, as well as the technical knowledge that was imparted with them, they had started gardening at home. And through that, they were providing food for their family and selling the excess to be able to pay for their school fees. They also told me that through that, they had been able to resist and fight off the industry that recruits so many young women in that region into prostitution. What do all of these forms of agricultural development have in common, the benefits of them? They give people seeds of hope, they give people choices, and they illuminate a pathway for people to achieve their dreams that they may have never thought were a potential. What would the quality of your life be if the only way that you thought you could provide for your family was to join the industry? Well, I know that That's not the life I want. What would a life be with a lot more kid smiles, a lot more full bellies, and a lot less crime? As for Juan, he's now farming. He's saving up money for those carpentry tools, and he's working on the side as a carpenter to gain experience. So when he gets those tools, he can start that business he's always wanted. Martin Luther said everything that's done in this world is done by hope, and I fully believe that. I've seen that. These people, these stories have proven that to me. And I believe that we, as a global community, can, if we work together, provide a better tomorrow. I'm hopeful of that. Thank you.